Again, good morning. It's always a blessing to be here and share this time together. You know, that little video there talked about life being a journey. We talk about that a lot. And it's not to be repetitive. It's not to be just, again, one-dimensional as much as it is. I find it right now, that's probably the theme for a lot of people. I know for me personally it is. I've never hidden that fact. This last year or so has been extraordinarily difficult for multiple reasons. And so the sometimes where we are is where we go. And studying and understanding how do we find answers, as people of faith, and trying to understand what does this journey look like. I think we have entered into this time of what did Jesus do, not for the just the simple implications of what does it say in Scripture, but what does it show us about life? How does it reveal those lessons to us right now in 26? And so we turn again to a very familiar passage. But even more so, what I want us to see is we turn to a familiar problem, life. How many of us can agree this morning that life happens? It does. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not. Let's just be honest about that. That's real. A couple weeks ago, we had a message that I spoke on about the temptation to walk away. All right. Interesting, funny story about that. That message actually got pulled from our YouTube channel for a couple of days. I got that fixed, but we were claimed in that message, and I went back and listened to it, that we had violated a copyright from a book that had something to do with Michael Jordan. I'm not quite sure how those two crossed, but we weren't talking about basketball, but even if we had, but anyhow. So all kinds of things happen, right? But anyhow, we had this message. We talked about the temptation to walk away. It said that those that were speaking to Jesus said to him, this is really hard. And then we read later in that passage that many walked away. They just said, we can't do this. We look at this passage today from Matthew chapter 4. Again, very familiar. We've all heard about the 40 days and 40 nights of temptation and all this other stuff. But oftentimes when one reads this passage, we're drawn to one word. And we can go all over kinds of different ways all over the place as we look at this. But for me, oftentimes where we get sidetracked and we get stopped is the word devil. And the reason that I say that is because that places us in a place that is easy to conjure up images, evil and the bad guy and the one that's always causing problems. In other words, the reason, the excuse, if you will, as to why things happen, why things keep coming up, why my life is so bad, because of this and because of that. I want to challenge that today. Is that true? Is that true? Or is the one offering the opportunity, should they be the focus? Or should the one who receives the opportunity and what they do with it, should that be the focus? I want us to think about this today from an objective point of view. I want us to look at in this passage, and I want us to see there are priceless life lessons found in the confines of these words. Here we find, and we begin that with the word then. Now, of course, we know we always break down words in these messages, but then is important because this points to not just after, but indeed next. All right, so what's next? What is going on? Well, what do we read about prior to this? Because we're starting this very chapter with the word then. So that absolutely tells me something else has happened. What has happened? What? Then what's going on? Well, the prior verses to this talk about the baptism of Jesus. A beautiful picture, a beautiful moment. And then we start chapter 4 with the word then. And that's not to be negative. That's life. Let's paint a picture. Let's look at what this is saying. One day, things are great. One day things are great. You had a beautiful moment, a celebration, a ceremony, all these different things. And then the next minute, you're asking yourself, where did that train come from that just ran over me? I never saw it coming. That's life. That happens, right? That seems to be the way that it goes. Then, it's a pivotal word. It's a pivotal point of storytelling, the changing from one scene to the other, if you will. I went here, then. I did this then. So we read this in full, and it tells us that Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. So let's look at this in full. Then Jesus. So this is specific as to who. Why does that matter? Why does that matter? It's not just for caricature in the Bible. It's not for just a reference to Jesus. But what it is pointing to is he is always teaching. Always. Every illustration involving Jesus is about teaching. And he's teaching, we see here, from experience. That's important because he's not just saying, do this and do that. No, he's saying, I did this and I went through that. Because now we can relate. You know, it tells you in the book of Hebrews that we don't have a high priest who can't be relatable. I'm paraphrasing, but that's what it's saying. He's been through it. And here we see something important, that it says Jesus, then Jesus. And so he's teaching here in this moment. And he's teaching from experience. The grief, the pain, the emotions, the joy. In other words, I've experienced this in life. Have you ever had conversations with someone who maybe has been down a similar road and you find that that conversation is much more productive than someone who hasn't? Okay, that's just true. Okay, that's not to compare war stories and scars and try to one-upsmanship everybody. Well, I went through this. Well, you ought to hear. I'm not talking about that. We've all done that, right? You know, mine is worse than yours, and we've all been down that road. But when there's a true compassion and a true connectivity there of, wow, you really do understand grief or abuse or this or whatever. So I've experienced this in life. It is those times for me personally, and I'm guessing maybe some of us, those have been some of my greatest teachers over the time of life. Have all those journeys been easy? No. And it wouldn't be until now, this late stage in life, and that I've learned now more maybe than I did when I was younger. Because now I'm able to process those things better and not just forego the lesson that is there. I look for the lesson now. What is it? What is it teaching? What is the moment here? And so it's beautiful to understand that, because when we have those moments, when we understand that something is teaching, then they allow you, because if you're teaching something and you receive that lesson, what you do with that lesson is important next, right? Then. So we have Jesus here returning what has been taught. You're able now to reach others that are in need, others that may be waiting for that person or that opportunity to come by to help them understand they're not alone. See, when we can just do better than just observe or give a mere opinion, but rather come along beside. That's the lesson that we're seeing here. Jesus is able to show that. I've been there. All right. So this is not about, some weird tale of supernatural transference here. No, there's a lesson here. And that's what I want us to see today. Jesus, it tells us, was led. That's important because that means that was on purpose. Okay, because it says he was led up by the Spirit. So he was being taken here on purpose. He was led by the Spirit. What is that telling us? He was being given guidance for the next steps, because these steps were needed to advance the journey for someone else. See, if I hadn't been through it, I couldn't tell you. If I didn't understand it, I couldn't explain it to you. That's the job of a good teacher. That's how one relates. That's how one is there. It's not just simply reading something, but relating something. So Jesus here, and putting himself in this position on purpose, and we read here that he was led up by the Spirit. If Jesus indeed, as it is written by Peter, is our greatest example, he says that Jesus Christ is our greatest example. How do you become an example if you never experience anything? This is important. So we see now that a lesson is being taught. He's being led up, it says, by the Spirit into the wilderness. What does that tell us? That is a vast expanse. That is a wide open space of the unknown. You're not sure what's coming. You're not sure who's coming. You're not sure what will happen. Well, what does that point to? What does that show us? What does that point us to? The wilderness is not asking you what you believe, but rather it is asking, who are you? And that's where you find out when you're in it. You find out. We talked last week about foundations. You find out which one you're on. Are you on the rock or you're on the sand? You find out pretty quick which one it is, because he says the wind and the rains came, and it came to both. We talked about that last week. So here we see he was led into the wilderness to be tempted. What is that? You're going to be given opportunities to make decisions. Every one of us is going to have that. It's going to happen. But it says he's going to be tempted by the devil. Now, what we need to understand is this is not a debate, if you will, about the literalcy of a figure or even how to define that word. That's not what this lesson is about. This lesson here in this verse, and many others, in fact, is understanding what is being taught here. What is being taught here? Because it's not about finding someone to blame. It's not about finding something to blame, because we are conditioned. We are conditioned in this world to find a place to point the finger. We are. Not that finger, but we are. It's got to be somebody else's fault. It's got to be this, it's got to be that. But rarely ever do we see that it's implied that that finger should actually be pointed inward. What did I do with the opportunity? Because it was merely offered. The yes or no came from me. The yes or no or the step forward came from me. So this is not about identifying the one responsible for the offering, but rather what is done with the offer. And that's what we're finding here as Jesus is walking this out in front of us, as he's been led into this wilderness to be tempted. What we find is these lessons are about deception. These lessons are about choices and consequences and self-worth and self-examination. Those are things that we all, as we experience life, as we plan for life, whether it's early, mid, late stage, it doesn't matter. Wherever we are, we're all in different cycles and different seasons in this life. These things take us to the next step. These things take us to the next place. And here is our example. This is how you handle it, because these moments are going to come. This is not about an if or a when. It's going to happen. We know that, right? And so we turn and we see the circumstances, right? We see about all the things that are going on. It says, then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil after. So we move from then to after, which points to a period of time has passed. All right, so he was led up, and then after he had what? After he had fasted 40 days and 40 nights. So this is when all of this took place. The after. That matters, right? Why? Because this points to understanding the word fast. Think about what it's saying here. All right, it says he's led up into the wilderness, and he had fasted. He had fasted. What does that point to? Intentional. Intentional. Rather than just being denied food by someone else. This tells us Jesus was pursuing answers. We're taught about fasting through Scripture, right? That's on purpose. I'm going to fast for a week. I'm going to fast for 40 days. Or this is intentional. So here we see something that is spoken of that has been entered into on purpose, for the purpose of trying to find a closeness with God, trying to find an answer, a desire for a new direction, or to prepare for the journey that is set before them. So this was on purpose. Jesus has entered this fast for 40 days. So this is not about being denied or placed in a situation where you're being starved out. That's not what it was. This was a learning moment. I need a strength greater than my own. That oftentimes is the pursuit of a fast. I need to see clearly, so I will not allow distraction to hinder me or the journey ahead of me. Life and its decisions that I must make are oftentimes at the core and the center of entering into such a time. And it's vitally important that we understand that versus just, again, a weakened state that has maybe been caused by something. This was intentional. This is telling us I need to remain focused, because when do the most temptations come? When we're trying to do something else, and especially if we're trying to do something important. You know, if you're working along whatever task you may have before you, That's when the phone rings. That's when somebody knocks at the door. That's when, you get a ding on your phone and you check the one text message and you end up staying there for 30 minutes because you end up scrolling social media. All right? It just happens. All right? That's not to pick on anybody. I'm just as guilty. It happens. And then, you look at your watch, oh man, I got to get back to work. It happens. All right? But here, that's when the most distractions come, is when we're trying to do something important or trying to remain on point with the task and we get behind. We read here that as a result of the 40 days, he was hungry. All right, so we consider quickly, that's not hard to figure out. The one, if you've gone for 40 days without eating, you're going to be hungry. Some of us had breakfast this morning, and it's only been 2 hours, and you're hungry now, right? So 40 days, that's a long time, right? And so you're going to be hungry. But what does that actually speaking of here in this concept of teaching, right? It also means one is weak. It also means one is vulnerable, which means they're in a position to make decisions and choices that will require thinking and not being desperate. Because sometimes if you make a choice out of desperation, what do? You make the wrong one. Or you make one that later on costs you more than it was worth. That's what we're trying to be pointed to here. Because think about this. You come out of this idea. I'm in need. I'm in desperate need. I'm weak. I'm hungry. I'm tired. All this other stuff. I'd do anything to fix that. I'd eat anything. Man, I'd eat, and I've heard all kinds of silly sayings over the years. I'd eat this, I'd eat that, whatever. I'd do anything for a sandwich. I'd give anything, and then we could go on and on with all that kind of statements. But what door does that open, friends? What door does that open? It opens the door to compromise. I'd do anything. Who's going to capitalize on that? Somebody that hears it. Really? How much do you mean that? That opportunity will come. How much do you mean that? Compromise. See, this is way bigger than whether we just pick up a salad or a cheeseburger. That's not what we're talking about. What directs my thoughts when I'm deciding? Am I thinking or am I acting out of desperation? And it says, then. So we see these words following each other, okay? Then Jesus was led up. After. And then we see in verse 3, then. So we find the state of weakness. We find the state of needing to make a decision, being vulnerable, all these other things. Then the tempter approached him. So we see that it's all coinciding with the timeline here. How does this work? When you're at your least amount of strength. It says, then. So this is another opportunity to make an offer. The tempter, and again, the one or the thing presenting itself as the guide. Oh, come on, it's okay. Come on. One time won't hurt. You need it for now. You deserve it. That's the new phrase I hear all the time. You deserve it. Deserve what? But we hear that all the time. Come on, just one time will be okay. It won't be a big deal. There's nobody around. Nobody will know. When does that take effect the most? When you're in the most need. When you're the weakest. When you're the most vulnerable. I'd do anything to have something to fill that void. And that gets a lot of people in trouble. It really does. And so we find something important in this lesson. He says, not just here, have a sandwich. Here, we're going to go run down the Golden Corral. No. We see the placing of doubt. He says, now look at the word here. He approached him. Approach is always important, how you approach a situation. He approached him and he said, if you are the Son of God. So doubt creates all kinds of issues because then it begins to plant seeds. Why am I? I thought I was stronger than this. I mean, can I really do this? Should I do this? If presents a question of certainty. We talked about last week about our foundation. This ties directly to that. It's more about should versus could. Because at the end of the day, we can do anything we want to. Paul writes about it. He says, all things are permissible. You can do whatever you want. Just not all things are beneficial. But got to weigh out the balance, friends. That's how it looks. And again, this is not about, correction. This is about thinking. And that's what this whole lesson is about. It's more about should versus could. Because he says, if you are who you've claimed to be, if you are the Son of God, if that's true, if that's really who you are, then tell these stones to become bread. Fix your problem. So we have a real need here, a hunger. That's a physical, tangible, real need. But we also see the wrong situation as a possible answer. In other words, I've got a choice. I can, but should I? Could Jesus have spoken and commanded that? Just like that. Would have been no big deal at all. But was that the answer at that moment? Was that going to prove anything? I'm going to fix it. What it comes down to is not the temptation here. That's not really what the key word is here. The key word is I. What am I going to do? The temptation's been given. The opportunity is there. What am I going to do? Because the temptation has no power unless I plug in the cord. All right? It's there. It may look good, it may smell good, it may seem good, it may seem like it answers all the questions, but it has no power until I activate it. But yet still we want to go, oh, well, so-and-so made me do it. Or so-and-so said it was, they sold me that product. We can go on and on and on about the examples. I'm hungry, so it's justified, right? I'm hungry. I mean, I can fix that. I can fix that. I don't need to trust in anything. I can fix that. I can go steal something. You know, I've been knocked down almost a couple of times within just the last several weeks, you know, trying to get into Walmart, somebody running out, you know, trying to steal something. It happens all the time. You know, I could fix that. I can just go steal something. I could go hurt somebody. I could take theirs. I can go, and we can just fill in the blank. What does that point to? Real issues in life in all forms and how to solve them. Because we can solve them in all kinds of ways, but what it really points to is the greater response is how will I respond? Because life's going to happen. Situations are going to present themselves. Whether we're in a weakened state, emotionally, financially, every kind of way. Physically, all these other positions are going to present themselves, but the temptation is merely an opportunity, not a have to. It is always just an opportunity. And again, it can be prettied up with persuasive words, but at the end of it all, it is our yes or no that makes the next step. I mean, all of us, and we could all probably at some point in time stand, which I would never embarrass anybody, but we could all stand and talk about opportunities we've had to do X, Y, Z, whatever. It could be anything. And whether we said yes or no. It could be a physical temptation. It could be a financial thing. It could be all kinds of stuff. I mean, we all have those moments, but it doesn't enact itself until we say yes. Jesus responds because the opportunity's been given here. Go tell these stones to become bread. Jesus says, it is written, man, so he's speaking to people, humanity, must not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God. In other words, what am I going to depend on more? What I can do or what God can do? That's the dilemma that it puts us in. That's the place that it puts us in. Which one am I going to trust more? Because I know through life experience, when I've trusted me more, I usually run off the rails, right? That's usually how that works when I've made the decisions that I didn't fully examine as to how it was going to go. So this is the first test of the wilderness. Who am I? Who am I? What am I doing here? And then we look at the next thing and we see the word then. So it doesn't stop there, right? We see in verse 5 because Jesus is given this statement, and then we see in verse 5, then. So what does that tell us? It doesn't stop there. That sounds kind of familiar, right? We go through one storm and we get dusted off and cleaned up from that, and then here it comes again. Okay? Again, that's not being negative. That's reality. We've all been there, right? You know, one opportunity after another. I thought I crossed this bridge, but there's 2 more to go. I thought I got through this. There's a little bit more to go. We've all been there. But what have we done with it? What do we do with it? It says, then the devil, so again, the opportunities continue, took him to the holy city. Now what is being tested? Faith. This is what this is about. Understand this. Our faith gets tested every day in some capacity or another. And this is a great lesson in this, because now the faith is being tested, because he's talking to the pinnacle here. He's up at the top. Faith is going to get tested. And friends, I'm telling you right now, this battle is very, very real. Not only what do I believe or who do I believe in, but the question is it really there? Because life, in its presentation of difficult moments and the struggles that comes with that, causes us to look really, really deep sometimes, and we struggle with that because we can't see the answers that we're looking for. And so here we read Jesus was at the pinnacle of the temple. In other words, everything that I've been told, everything that I have ever believed, everything that I am standing on is right here. I got to look at this, and I got to really study this, and I got to understand this. And then we read, and took him onto the high place of the temple, and he said to him, if you are the Son of God. So we see that doubt being planted again. In other words, things get difficult in life. And when they do, what's the first thing that starts creeping in? Doubt. Is everything that I've stood for, is everything that I've done, is everything that I've taught, everything that I believed. And when doubt starts to seep in, and when doubt starts to get through that door, the struggles get harder. They do, because we begin to question, is any of this even working? Are my prayers even being heard? We could go down those roads. I've been down those roads. I'm telling you, this is very, very real. Does it even matter anymore? And the questions again are limitless because it's a very, very easy place to get to. And we see here in the temptation, we see here in the struggle, in the weakness, if you are really sure, are you really, really sure? You know, and over the time we hear phrases like, I know that I know that I know. We've heard those things about salvation, all this other stuff. That's easy to say when things are going well. And I'm just being really honest with you, being totally transparent with you. It's easy to say when things are going well. But when everything's falling apart and nothing's working, it's not such smooth sailing in that moment. Here, we're talking about having our faith tested as Jesus is standing on the pinnacle of this temple. And we look, and he says, if you are, and you begin to ask, am I really sure? I mean, does God really love me? Sure don't seem like it right now. Is he really even there? Then I need to make him prove it. That's the temptation. Yeah, that's what the enemy presents here in this particular case. Dive off the building. Prove it. Make him prove it to you. Make him prove that he's still there. Make him prove that all of this is even real. See, this is a test of faith because faith is not about proof. But here we find the temptation is to lose or forego faith when proof is not there. Am I going to hold on to what I've really believed? Am I going to hold on to what I've stood on for all this time? Well, the heck with it. That's the temptation. That's where the struggle is. That's where the answer has to be found. And so here he says, jump off. Just throw yourself down. In other words, let that if stick around long enough and it'll create some issues. And if it creates issues, then it will create curiosity. And then seeking will turn to demanding, which opens the door to doubting deeper, which leads to walking away. And that's how this progress works. That's how it evolves from one step to the other. And that is the temptation. It's not about being on a high building and diving off and seeing if God will save me. That's not the lesson here. It's about, do I trust him at all? Do I understand what am I standing on? What am I building my life around on my faith? Am I understanding that? And so we find how that temptation, how that opportunity is given. It's given by the use of Scripture. It's used by following, and it says he will give his angels orders concerning you. You'll be okay. It's not a big deal, right? They're going to support you with their hands so that you won't strike your foot against a stone. So go ahead and test him. See how it works. Go ahead and try. You know, you say you believe all this stuff. Go find out. Put him to the test. Scripture, let me tell you this, and I mean this with all my heart. Scripture misused causes harm like we could never imagine. Okay? It can be an awful weapon in the wrong hands. And it happens all the time with twisting and turning words. But we see here that Jesus responded, and what was read, he said, for it is written, he will give you this and that. And then Jesus rebutted, and he says, it is also written. It is also written, which is a rebuttal of what was said, which is also the rejection of the manner in which it was used. Because he said, it was written, do not test the Lord your God. Do I believe, is what he's saying? Do I believe that God will protect me if I jump off? Sure. Absolutely. But why should he? I'm the one that jumped. Think about that. Why should he? I did it. Why should it? Lord, I'm desperate right now. I'm going to go here in this bank and I'm going to hold him up. Please don't let me get arrested. But you did that. Why should I get a protection of that? Oh, I believe you're there, but I'm going to jump off this building to find out. You may survive it, but you have a broke leg, hip, and sore pride and everything else. We've got to look at this. Why should he? It was my action. He doesn't have to prove anything. He doesn't have to prove anything when it was because of me. We miss that lesson sometime, but that is very, very valuable. Every test is a reflection of something internal. Every test is a reflection of something internal. So we see the pattern of events here and how this is working. Needs, I'm hungry. Faith, what do I believe? And then lastly, we get to wants and desires. How many of us in this room have those? Every one of us. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. We all want, whatever. And everybody's got different levels of that, whether it's financial stuff or whether it's, better health or whether it's, better whatever, a bigger family, bigger house, whatever, all this different stuff. We all have those moments, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's completely fine. But that's what we fear. But this points to another door. This points to another opportunity. One more time, if you will. Look at how this is written. So we've gone through the vulnerable stage, the needs. We'll just do this. We've gone through the faith. Do you really believe that? And then we see in verse 8, again. Another opportunity, another door. But it's purposeful because it's pointing us to the stages of life. We struggle when we're weak. We struggle sometimes in faith. But we also have these wants and desires. How do we get there? How do we get there? Well, what's the old saying? If at first you don't succeed, try again. So we see 3 times here, right? We see 3 opportunities. And I'm telling you right now, that's more real than we ever want to consider sometimes because the opportunities are there. And it says, again, the devil took him up to a very high mountain. This speaks of the pursuit of dreams. That's not a bad thing. Everybody's got dreams and we should all pursue them. But it is how such is accomplished that counts. I thought about this from a sports analogy. If your name is in the record book, but it has an asterisk beside it and nobody else's don't, there's a reason for that. You may get the recognition, but you don't get the honor. Okay? If you're a baseball fan, you know exactly who I'm talking about. Jeff does. And it's just true, right? You may have done the deed. You may have accomplished the goal, but nobody else respects it. Nobody else honors that. Shortcuts count. They matter. So here we see he's on the high mountain. That's, again, dreams, goals, aspirations, all that. And it tells us he showed him all the kingdoms of the world. That's a key word. All the kingdoms of the world and the splendor. What does that mean? But to go back to the creation story, it's pleasing to the eye. Man, that looks good. Which takes us back to the first part. I'd do anything to have that. I'd give my right arm to be in that house. Or I'd do this, or I'd do. How many people have said that? Again, we're not being critical. That's just true. It's a part of our culture. It's what we do. I will do anything. So here we're seeing, look at this. Look at this vast array. Look at all this magnificence before you. Wow. Look at that. Now I've got your attention. Now I've got your attention. Why? Because it's pleasing to the eye. Look at this. It's what you've always wanted. Look at this. It's what you've always dreamed of. You've stayed awake at night planning for this, wondering how could it ever happen? I'll give it to you. I'll just give it to you. You don't have to do anything for it. You don't have to pay nothing. I'll just give it to you. What enters the door at that very moment? Temptation. The opportunity, the chance right then to accept the offer. And it's the offer, not the one offering the sales pitch, if you will. The offer is telling you, the offer is saying, what will you do? Would you really do anything to have that? Would you really compromise yourself? Would you really sell your soul? Would you really leave your spouse? Would you really do this? I mean, all the different comments that have been said over time, would you really do that? What are you willing to pay? What are you willing to pay to fulfill that dream, to fulfill that goal, whatever? Just because, again, this is revealing here. The revealing here is not just the kingdom of the world, if you will, What these are kingdoms without the cross. What does that mean, Pastor? What are you talking about? There's no sacrifice. It doesn't cost anything. It was just handed over. It was just free. There's nothing there. It's empty. There's shortcuts, no sacrifice, no integrity, no faith. The easy road. Just take this and everything goes away. Just take this and everything gets better. Isn't that all the marketing schemes on TV? Just take this and you'll instantly be better. Except for all the horrific side effects that come with it. Same thing here. You can have everything that you see. You can have everything that you see. And then the cost is whispered in a very gentle, subtle voice. Oh, that's not a big deal until you realize you've already signed the contract with all the small print that scares you to death because it just changed your life forever. This is important as we look at what this lesson is here, because that cost can be financial, that cost can be emotional, that cost can be physical, and that list can get really, really long, because now we see if. And we see if move from doubt to obstacle. See, this is no longer about if you are. This is if you will. And that is two totally different places. Because I can doubt a whole lot about me because I know my shortcomings and all those other stuff like that. So I can have a lot about me. But if I will, that presents a conscious choice. That presents an opportunity that I have to give an answer to, yes or no. What am I going to do? I see it, and I can have it if I'll do fill in the blank. What does that mean? How does that look? And so we see it moving from doubt to obstacle, because whatever the desire is visible. You can see it. Look at this. He took him up on the high mountain so he could see it. You know, I'm a mountain person. Don't hide that. Love it. And there's nothing like being on the top of that hill and looking out across that valley and seeing the expanse that is there. It's just gorgeous. It's breathtaking. You can see everything, and it's all there. And this is the vision that we're getting. Look at this. I'm going to show you all the things and all the splendor. That's a key word, because it's beautiful. It's what you want. It's your very desire. It's everything. And I'll give it to you. I'll give you all these things if you'll fall down and worship me. Wow. That's a big if. Because the if here is what stands between you and that vision. That's the if. That's where it stands. It's the obstacle. It's the place is there. Because here we see that opportunity is very, very real. But so is the cost. And the cost is very, very high. The cost is very high. And we have to ask ourselves, are we willing? Are we willing to pay? Because what we find Jesus here saying is, go away. What was he doing? He was taking a stand. He was taking a stand. He was saying, no. The reason that he was able to do that is not because of the strength and the power of the deity, but the humanity here, the strength and the power of the foundation. In other words, I'm not going to give that away. I'm not going to give away everything that I've stood on and believed and held on to. I'm not going to give that away, and I'm not going to sell it out for an empty promise, because that may very well be what it is. You know, things are facades. Things are. Who remembers the old? It may still be on. I don't know. But back in the day, there was an old show called "Let's Make a Deal" with a guy named Monty Hall. You know, and they, well, you've got this. We've got this brand new TV right here that you can have. You can see it, or you can take curtain number 3. And then open the curtain, there'll be nothing there. Sometimes empty promises are just there, because sometimes people will take advantage and try to do all kinds of different stuff. We get it all the time now. The telemarketers, they call you and say, I had one call me this past week, very, very deep foreign accent, nothing against that, but person, I answered the phone and they asked for me by name, and I said, how can I help you? Do you know we're getting ready to turn your TV off? I'm like, no, I wasn't aware of that. Are you with Spectrum? No, click. I mean, so the whole gimmick was, okay, well, you got to pay me this fee and we're going to keep your TV on. How many people fall for that? Sadly, a lot, because fear drives a lot of things. We live in a gullible world. Here we see the opportunity that one is saying no, and Jesus is saying, I'm not going to sell out, and I'm only going to serve and worship God. You see, compromise and selling out and giving in, these go so much further than just moral invitations to be naughty. No, these are life-impacting decisions. And as we've always said, they don't just impact me, they impact others. Whether it's our family, our coworkers, it could be all kinds of different things. The individual, we have to make these decisions, and it's not about who makes the offer. It's whether I accept it or not. That is the lesson being taught here. And in such a grand way, because it's from when I'm at my weakest, when I'm really wrestling in my faith battle, and when I'm facing my dreams. How do I get to all of those places? It all goes back to what we stand on, whether I accept the offer or not. I've had a long-standing policy in my personal life when it comes to these type of things. And if you'll just do this, if you'll just that, I don't go to jail for nobody. All right, I've stood on that for a very, very long time because cost matter. I had a guy come to me years ago. I'm in my office as a pastor, a guy and I knew him quite well. He come to me and he said, "Hey man, I need a favor." Okay, well, for me, that always raises a red flag because I don't never know what is involved, right? But he said, "I need a favor." I said, "Okay, what's that?" He said, "I got this check that somebody wrote me." And he said, "It's for this thing that we're going to be doing in town and this and that." And they wrote the check directly to me. I said, "Okay, what's the problem?" He said, "Well, I don't really want to use it like it is because it's written to me. And if I put it in the bank, then I'm probably going to get nailed for taxes." He said, "So here's what I want to do. I want to sign it over to the church, and you put it in, and then you just give me the money back." I said, "Man, you fool, that's money laundering. I'm not doing that," you know. But I thought we were friends. I'm like, "We ain't that good of friends." But again, Andy don't go to jail for nobody. But anyhow, we see a great, great lesson here, right? When we look beyond names, and we look beyond characters and excuses and justifications, what we see once again is a giant mirror and an audience of one. What am I going to do? It's not about what anybody else does. It's not about what anybody else offers. What am I going to do? We see a true lesson in this very familiar old text. We see a true lesson being taught here. Jesus never panics. He doesn't fret. He doesn't argue. He doesn't get defensive. He never has a fit. He never tries to prove anything. No, he just remains faithful. So we see he didn't, and this is great. And I'm not saying it because I wrote it, but this is a powerful line. And I looked back through my notes this morning. I'm like, dang, I wrote that. That's pretty good. So what we find out here is Jesus did not escape the wilderness. He allowed his faith to help him walk through it. That's what life is. That's what life is. How do we manage this thing, friends? So at the end of it all, this is about not who the devil is. No. This is about when the wilderness comes. And it will. It will. We're all going to walk in it. And once we enter it, can we answer the question, who am I? Who am I? And who do I trust? Because we read here at the end, the devil left him and the angels came and began to serve him. What we can grasp as help is always there. Help is always there. But the test, the wilderness, if you will, lets us see just how much we really need what is available and how much we really trust it. Temptation is only an offer. Always remember that, friends. Temptation is only an offer. It's the yes or no that changes things. Amen? All right, Scott comes up and we'll have our final song and finishing up our day together. These songs that we're getting ready to do, of course, obviously combining old and new. I've always liked this version. But just to think about what it means, as maybe just whether you sing along or whether you just think about the grace that is offered. You know, that comes in those times. And sometimes it's difficult to see it there. I'll be the first one to tell you that. Sometimes life really puts blinders on us and we can't see sometimes the things that are there. But when we begin to look outside of that and realize there is something bigger than us, there is something more powerful than us, and we begin to pursue that, I believe just like in this lesson that we see, if we keep going, we'll find it. We'll find the answer, whatever it is. So let's stand as we look into this final song.